On a mild afternoon in Seoul, the kind of day where the sun felt just warm enough to keep the cool breeze at bay, outside a quiet cafe in the bustling district of Gangnam, a man sat at one of the outdoor tables, wearing a black cap pulled low over his face. He was unmistakable, Jungkook, the global superstar from BTS. Though years had softened the sharpness of his youthful features, his aura was undeniable. Passers-by occasionally glanced his way, unsure if they should interrupt the idol's moment of solitude. Across the street, another man stood unnoticed by most. His clothes were worn and layered, each piece telling a story of days spent in the elements. His hair was disheveled, and he clutched a small cardboard sign in one hand while his other fidgeted nervously in his pocket. His name was Min Jae, and today marked his third week sleeping under the overpass near the Han River. Min Jae hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. His stomach gnawed at him, a relentless reminder of how far he'd fallen. As he scanned the cafe for someone who looked approachable, his eyes locked on Jungkook. At first, he hesitated. What could a man like that possibly care about someone like him? But hunger has a way of eroding pride. Taking a deep breath, Min Jae crossed the street, each step heavier than the last. His voice was almost inaudible as he approached the idol's table. "Sir, can you spare $1?" Jungkook looked up slowly, removing his cap. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment, Min Jae wondered if he'd made a mistake. But then Jungkook leaned back in his chair, studying Min Jae as if trying to piece together a puzzle. The seconds stretched on, and Min Jae's anxiety grew. He was ready to apologize and walk away when Jungkook finally spoke. $1, he said, his tone neutral. Then, with a hint of a smile, he added, "Sit down. Let's talk." Min Jae hesitated. The invitation felt surreal, almost like a scene out of one of those music videos he used to watch when life was simpler. "Sit down with Jungkook." He scanned Jungkook's face for a sign that this wasn't a cruel joke, but there was no malice there. Just a calm curiosity that made him feel both exposed and oddly comforted. With a quiet "thank you," Min Jae eased into the chair across from Jungkook. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the cardboard sign on the table, angling it so it wouldn't catch too much attention. He could feel the weight of Jungkook's gaze, but it wasn't judgmental. It was curious, like someone who wanted to know the story behind the layers of dirt and despair. Min Jae wasn't used to this. Most people avoided eye contact or threw him loose change without a second thought. Nobody wanted to hear his story anymore. But sitting here, under the steady gaze of someone he never imagined meeting, the words started to spill out before he could stop them. I'm sorry if I bothered you," Min Jae stammered, his voice raw. I don't like asking. I've been trying to find work, but it's hard. Harder than I thought it'd be." He glanced down at his hands, ashamed of how desperate he sounded. Jungkook didn't interrupt. He just listened, which was more than most had done in years. Min Jae took a deep breath and continued, the dam breaking. "I was a delivery driver, had a steady job, a bike, a routine. Then the company downsized and I was let go. It didn't take long for the savings to run out. Then came the late notices, and after that," he paused, swallowing hard. "Well, you can guess the rest." He tried to laugh, but it came out bitter and hollow. "Funny, right? I spent my whole life delivering to people's doors, and now I can't even keep a roof over my own head." Jungkook's face remained calm, but his eyes softened. Min Jae could feel the shame creeping in again, and he tried to steer the conversation away from himself. "I know you probably get asked for things all the time. I don't mean to be another guy with a handout. I don't know what else to do anymore." But Jungkook wasn't the kind of man to brush off a story like that. He had a response Min Jae never saw coming. Jungkook leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his hands clasped loosely. The air between them felt heavier, quieter, as if the world had slowed down just for this conversation. Min Jae could feel his pulse quicken. He half expected Jungkook to hand him a couple of bills and politely dismiss him, as others had done before. But instead, Jungkook asked a question Min Jae wasn't prepared for. "What's your name?" Min Jae blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. Min Jae," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook nodded slowly, letting the name settle. "Min Jae," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Then after a pause, he said, "You know, Min-jae, I've sung a lot of songs in my life about love, dreams, struggles. And one thing I've learned is that every person has a story. Good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter. What matters is how they choose to carry it. So, tell me this. What's the next chapter of your story?" Min-jae stared at Jungkook, unsure if he was serious. "The next chapter?" he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah," Jungkook said, leaning back. "You're still here, aren't you? Breathing, talking, asking for $1. That means your story isn't over yet. So, what's the next chapter?" Min-jae felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't have an answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought that far ahead in a long time. Survival didn't leave much room for long-term planning. "I don't know," Min-jae admitted finally. "I guess I just want to make it through the day." Jungkook's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in thought. "That's not a chapter, Min-jae. That's a sentence. You need a chapter, a real one. Something you can build on." Min-jae felt an odd mix of frustration and curiosity. He wanted to ask Jungkook what he knew about struggle, but he held his tongue. There was something about the way Jungkook spoke, like he wasn't just throwing out cliches, but genuinely wanted Min-jae to think. Jungkook reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. Min-jae's heart sank. This was the part where Jungkook would transfer him some money and send him on his way. But Jungkook didn't pull up a payment app. Instead, he opened his contacts and typed out a name and address, then handed the phone to Min-jae. "Go here," Jungkook said, his tone firm but not unkind. "It's a shelter run by a friend of mine. They'll help you get cleaned up, find a job, maybe even a place to stay. But it's up to you to take the first step." Min-jae stared at the screen, his hands trembling. Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice cracking. Did Jungkook's expression soften just a fraction? "Because someone did it for me once, and I wouldn't be sitting here if they hadn't." But Min-jae wasn't sure if he could believe in second chances. Not after everything he'd been through. Min-jae's fingers hovered over the phone as if it were made of glass, fragile and full of promise. He wasn't sure he deserved it. The name and address on the screen felt like a lifeline, but the weight of his doubts pulled at him. Could he really trust this? Could he trust Jungkook? "I don't know, man," Min-jae said after a long silence, shaking his head. "I've tried places like that before. They don't really help people like me." Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. "People like you? What does that even mean?" Min-jae swallowed hard, avoiding eye contact. "You wouldn't get it. Guys like me, we're just forgotten." Jungkook leaned forward again, his voice quiet but firm. "You think I've never been down? You think I don't know what it's like to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world and no one's there to help you lift it?" Min-jae looked up, startled. Jungkook's face, though calm, carried the weight of his words. "I grew up in Busan," Jungkook continued. "Not exactly the easiest place to dream big. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to wonder if anyone will ever see you for who you really are. And let me tell you something, Min-jae, it's not about how hard you fall. It's about whether you're willing to get back up, even when the odds are stacked against you." The words hit Min-jae harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to argue but found he had nothing to say. Jungkook leaned back, his tone softening. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I have all the answers. But what I do know is this. Life isn't fair, and it never will be. The only thing you can do is decide whether you're going to let that break you or build you." Min-jae felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, but he quickly blinked them away. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice cracking. "No, it's not," Jungkook agreed. "But simple doesn't mean easy. It's hard as hell, but if you don't try, you'll never know what could have been." Min-jae stared at the phone again, his mind racing. He thought about the nights he'd spent on cold concrete, the meals he'd scavenged from dumpsters, the faces that turned away from him every day. And now, here was this man, a stranger, a global icon, telling him he was worth more than all of that. For the first time in years, Min-jae felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. Or maybe it was just the realization that he had nothing left to lose. "I'll think about it," Min-jae said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook nodded, as if that was enough. "Good. That's all I'm asking." But Min-jae wasn't the only one affected by this encounter. Jungkook had his own reasons for stepping in, reasons that would soon come to light. Min-jae clutched the phone tightly as he stood to leave, unsure of what to say or how to feel. Jungkook's words echoed in his mind, stirring up memories he'd buried long ago, of better days, of dreams that once felt achievable. As he took a few hesitant steps away, he turned back. "Thanks for listening," he said awkwardly, his voice barely carrying over the hum of the street. Jungkook gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Take care of yourself, Min-jae," he said simply before slipping his cap back on and returning to his coffee. But Min-jae didn't see Jungkook's hand falter slightly as he picked up the cup. He didn't notice the way Jungkook's jaw tightened for a brief moment, as if holding back a flood of emotion. Sitting alone again, Jungkook let out a slow breath, staring at the empty chair where Min-jae had been just moments before. It wasn't the first time he'd been reminded of his past, but it hit harder this time. He'd been younger than Min-jae when he'd first learned how quickly life could knock you down. Growing up in Busan, Jungkook had watched his family struggle to make ends meet. There were nights when all they had was a simple meal of rice and kimchi to share. And then there were the strangers, neighbors, teachers, sometimes complete nobodies, who had stepped in with small acts of kindness that made all the difference. That he remembered one teacher in particular who had encouraged him to audition for a talent show. It wasn't much, but it taught him something invaluable: the power of believing in someone. That teacher had seen potential in a shy kid that no one else did, and it had changed the course of Jungkook's life. Now, years later, Jungkook carried that lesson with him. He'd built a career that most people could only dream of, but he'd never forgotten where he came from or the people who helped him get there. For Jungkook, helping Min-jae wasn't about charity. It was about giving someone else the chance he'd once been given. That he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Min-jae, but he also knew that sometimes all it took was one person believing in you to spark something bigger. Meanwhile, Min-jae walked aimlessly through the streets, the phone still clenched in his hand. He passed by shop windows where his reflection stared back at him, tired, worn, and defeated. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something new. He stopped outside a laundromat, staring at the flickering neon sign. With the little money he had left, he decided to wash his clothes. If he was going to show up at that shelter Jungkook had mentioned, he wanted to look presentable. It wasn't much, but it was a step. That first step would be the hardest, and the most important one Min-jae had taken in years. That Min-jae's first visit to the shelter was overwhelming. The fluorescent lights, the sound of hurried footsteps, and the steady buzz of voices made him feel out of place. But the staff was kind. They didn't judge him for the state he was in, and for the first time in years, Min-jae felt like someone actually saw him. Not as a problem, but as a person. Days turned into weeks, and though the road wasn't smooth, Min-jae began piecing his life back together. The shelter helped him secure a temporary job at a nearby convenience store, where he quickly proved himself to be reliable and hardworking. With the money he earned, he moved into a modest shared apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over his head and a step toward stability. Through it all, he thought about Jungkook. He kept the phone number, now saved in his contacts, as a reminder of the moment that changed everything. One night, after a particularly long shift, Min-jae sat down and wrote Jungkook a message. He thanked him for the kindness he'd shown that day at the cafe and told him about the progress he'd made. Min-jae didn't expect a response, but sending the message felt like closure, a way to acknowledge the man who had given him a second chance. Months later, Jungkook received the message. Sitting in his quiet studio, he read it carefully, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He saved the message in a folder where he kept other notes from fans and strangers alike. For Jungkook, it was never about recognition or gratitude. It was about paying forward the compassion he'd been shown when he needed it most. That Min-jae's story didn't end there. Inspired by his own journey, he started volunteering at the same shelter that had helped him. He spoke with others who were struggling, sharing his story and offering them the same encouragement Jungkook had given him. Slowly but surely, he became a symbol of resilience and hope within his community. The cafe in Gangnam remained a quiet backdrop for countless passersby, unaware of the life-changing conversation that had taken place there. But for Min-jae and Jungkook, it would always be more than just a meeting. It was a moment that proved the power of human connection, a simple gesture that rippled outward in ways neither of them could have predicted. And for those who hear their story, it serves as a reminder. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest transformations.